Overlooking the San Francisco Bay, a fortress of gray stone stands against the water. This is San Quentin State Prison, California's oldest and most notorious penitentiary. From a distance, with seagulls crying overhead and sunlight glinting off the razor wire, it almost looks serene. But that illusion shatters the moment you step inside its walls. Within this prison lies a corridor where time itself seems to hold its breath, a place where the air is heavy with history and fear. This is San Quentin's Death Row. The East Block, built over a century ago, was never meant to hold the condemned. Its concrete walls seem to sweat in the summer heat and freeze in the winter cold. The hallways are long and suffocating, and the narrow windows offer only a sliver of the outside world. Every inch of this building remembers the men who have waited here, some for decades, knowing their lives would end not by chance, but by appointment. The cells are small, barely large enough for a man to stretch his arms, and each is home to someone sentenced to die by the state of California. Some are guilty beyond any doubt. Others have spent years proclaiming their innocence, their voices growing hoarse with repetition. But here, they all share the same fate. At San Quentin, death doesn't arrive like a sudden storm. It creeps in slowly. It starts with paperwork, a change in a guard's tone, and eventually, a date circled in red ink. Once that date is known, it becomes a living presence in the cell, a constant, breathing reminder of the end. For decades, this was the final stop. More executions have taken place at San Quentin than anywhere else in California. First, it was the gas chamber, a pale green room that smelled of chemicals and terror. Later, lethal injection replaced the cyanide, but the ritual remained the same. The final walk, the silent witnesses, and the crushing silence right before the end. The guards call it the walk. The inmates call it the longest walk of your life. Every step down that final corridor carries the weight of a lifetime. Memories, regrets, and unspoken words echo with each footfall. Some men cry. Some men pray. Some stare straight ahead, their faces hollow, as if they are already gone. And some, perhaps most terrifyingly, walk with a calm acceptance, having made peace with a fate the world could never understand. They say the real horror of death row isn't the execution itself. It's the waiting. Waking up every single morning not knowing if this will be the day it all ends. The legal process is a cruel roller coaster of hope and despair. Appeals can drag on for 20 or 30 years. One day, a rumor spreads that executions might resume. The next, there's talk of a moratorium. Every headline from the outside world sends shockwaves through the tier, a constant, agonizing uncertainty. The cells are stacked like tombs, and from within them, men shout to one another, trading stories, jokes, and legal advice. Some have been here so long they've watched guards come and go, watched entire decades slip by through a crack of light. And every man on the round knows the sound that means everything is about to change. Normally, the guards' footsteps have a steady rhythm as they do their counts. But when those footsteps slow down, when they pause outside a cell for just a moment too long, when the jingle of keys lingers, the entire tier holds its breath. Because that pause often means an execution notice has arrived. San Quentin's death row has housed some of the most infamous criminals in American history, men whose crimes shocked the nation. But inside these walls, notoriety means nothing. The prison strips everyone down to the same brutal routine. The same food slots sliding open. The same lights-out call. The same concrete pressing in from all sides. In here, you are not a father, a son, or a monster. You are an inmate, number ###, waiting to die. The guards who witness these final moments rarely speak of them. Those who do often describe hearing the sounds long after, the tightening of restraints, the final shallow breaths, the moment the room falls completely silent. Some guards transfer out after a single execution, unable to bear walking those halls again. Because San Quentin doesn't just execute inmates, it leaves a permanent mark on everyone who passes through its gates. The walls themselves feel like they've absorbed the last words, the final prayers, the silent screams of men who realized, in their last seconds, that no miracle was coming. And yet, even in this place of endings, life, in a way, continues. Inmates draw, they write, they study law with the intensity of seasoned attorneys, memorizing case law and legal precedents as if knowledge itself could be a shield against death. Some become incredible artists, their work escaping the prison walls even if they never will. Others become ghosts long before their execution date, staring at the walls, lost in a silence that nothing can penetrate. Somewhere deep inside San Quentin, the execution chamber sits ready, unused for now, but never forgotten. It serves as a constant, quiet threat. Because death row doesn't need to actively kill you to break you. It only needs to remind you that it can. As night falls over the San Francisco Bay, the water grows dark and still. Lights flicker on inside the East Block. And behind the steel doors, hundreds of men lie awake in their narrow cells, listening to the prison breathe around them, each one wondering just how many more nights they have left. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into the parts of our world we rarely get to see. The nights on San Quentin's death row are never truly quiet. Even when the lights dim and the tear settles into something resembling sleep, the prison continues to move. Pipes groan behind the walls. Distant doors slam somewhere far down the block. A guard's radio crackles, then goes silent again. These sounds become companions, reminders that the world has not stopped just because the men inside these cells wish it would. For those who have been here the longest, night is the worst part. During the day, there are routines, counts, meals, brief conversations shouted through bars, the thin distraction of books or legal paperwork. But at night, when the bay wind presses cold air through the cracks and the darkness stretches endlessly, there is nothing left to hide from. Regret grows louder. Fear becomes physical. And memory turns cruel. Some inmates replay the moment everything went wrong over and over again, searching for a detail that might change the ending. A different decision. A different word spoken. A door not opened. Others relive the trial, the way the courtroom felt when the verdict was read, the sound of the judge's voice when the sentence was announced. Death. Not life. Death. For many, the moment still doesn't feel real, even years later. Because on death row, time breaks in strange ways. A man can arrive in his 20s and still be here in his 50s. Hair turns grey. Hands shake. Faces wrinkle. Yet the sentence never ages. It remains exactly the same as the day it was handed down. While the outside world races forward, new technology, new laws, new generations, death row stays frozen, a museum of unresolved endings. San Quentin holds the largest death row population in the Western Hemisphere. At its peak, more than 700 condemned men lived inside these walls. The sheer number creates a unique kind of terror. No one is anonymous, yet everyone is replaceable. Executions are rare now, stalled by legal battles and political shifts, but that uncertainty makes things worse, not better. Because hope here is dangerous. A man might spend decades believing his appeal will succeed. He learns the language of law. He memorized dates and rulings. He writes letters to journalists, activists, anyone who might listen. And sometimes, miraculously, a conviction is overturned. A sentence is reduced. A man walks off death row alive. Those stories spread fast. They travel cell to cell like contraband, whispered through vents and shouted across tears. They keep men breathing. They keep men believing. And they make the fall that much harder when another appeal is denied, when another execution date is set, when reality reasserts itself with brutal clarity. There is a sound that carries special weight on death row, the sound of paper sliding under a cell door. Most notices come through that way. Mail, legal updates, court decisions, and inmates can often tell what kind of paper it is just by the way it moves across the concrete. Thin envelopes glide softly. Thick packets scrape and catch. But when the paper stops just outside the bars and doesn't move again, the air changes. Some men wait minutes before reaching for it. Some wait hours. A few never touch it at all, asking guards to remove it instead. Because once you read it, the uncertainty is over. The waiting transforms into something else entirely. Now there is a date. Once a date exists, death row shifts around you. Guards behave differently, not cruelly, but carefully. They speak slower. They avoid eye contact. Other inmates notice the change immediately. They ask questions that don't need answers. They offer quiet words of support shouted through steel and concrete. Some pray. Some curse. Some withdraw completely, sealing themselves off from everyone else. Because no one wants to imagine themselves in that position. San Quentin has seen men break under the weight of that knowledge. Some stop eating. Some tear apart their cells in fits of rage. Others become eerily calm, as if the struggle is finally over. Psychologists call it acceptance. Inmates call it giving up. The walk to the execution chamber begins long before the actual walk ever happens. It begins in the mind. The chamber itself sits only a short distance from death row, but it might as well be on another planet. For years, it stood unused, silent, waiting, its straps neatly arranged, It's gurney cold and untouched. The gas chamber still exists too, sealed off but never demolished, a reminder of an era when death came choking invisible, when witnesses watched bodies convulse behind glass. California changed methods. It changed rules. It changed governors. But San Quentin never stopped being a place built for killing. And everyone inside knows it. Some guards have worked death row for decades. They learn to recognize patterns in the men they supervise. They know who will shout and who will go quiet. They know who writes poetry and who studies scripture. And they know who won't make it through the night once a date is set. Because suicide is the unspoken reality of death row. It is rarely discussed publicly, but inside San Quentin, everyone understands the risk. When hope collapses completely, some men decide they will choose their own ending rather than wait for the state to choose it for them. Guards watch closely. Cells are searched. Lights are kept on longer. But despair is creative, and desperation is patient. Every life lost inside these walls, execution or otherwise, leaves a mark. And the prison remembers. There are inmates who claim San Quentin is haunted. They speak of voices in the East Block at night, of shadows moving when no one stands, of a coldness that settles into certain cells no matter the season. Guards laugh it off, but some refuse to work certain tiers after dark. Some say there are places where the air feels wrong, as if it has absorbed too many final breaths. Whether the stories are true almost doesn't matter, because belief alone is enough to make the fear real. As dawn breaks over the bay, pale light filters through the narrow windows. Another day begins. Another count. Another tray of food slid through a slot. Another 24 hours survived. But somewhere in the administration offices, files are being reviewed. Court decisions are being signed. Schedules are being drafted. And one day, maybe soon, maybe years from now, a guard will receive an order that changes everything. A name, a cell number, a time. And when that moment arrives, San Quentin will do what it has always done. It will open its doors, and someone will walk toward the end. The day an execution order becomes real, San Quentin feels it before anyone says a word. The prison's rhythm changes in subtle ways, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to those who live inside it. Guards arrive earlier. Supervisors walk the tiers more often. Radios stay on a little longer, voices lower, tighter. Somewhere deep in the administrative wing, phones ring that normally don't. And by the time the sun begins to sink toward the bay, death row already knows. Word travels fast in a place where nothing is private. A guard pauses outside a cell for half a second too long. A sergeant whispers to another officer instead of speaking openly. An inmate returning from a shower catches a glimpse of unfamiliar staff moving down the corridor. These are the signs. They always are. Tonight is different. The man at the center of it all sits alone in his cell, staring at a wall he has memorized inch by inch. He has known this day was possible for years. He has imagined it so many times it lost its power to shock. And yet, when the confirmation finally arrives, when the date, the hour, the procedure are no longer hypothetical, his body reacts before his mind can. Hands tremble. Mouth dries. The air feels thinner. The cell feels smaller. San Quentin allows condemned inmates certain final privileges. A last meal. Visits with spiritual advisors. Time to write letters. For some, these moments bring comfort. For others, they feel like cruel gestures, reminders that everything meaningful is about to be taken away. Some men ask for elaborate meals, flavors they haven't tasted since childhood. Others refuse food entirely. A few request simple things: coffee, bread, fruit, nothing special, nothing memorable. As if denying the ritual gives them a final shred of control. Letters are harder. What do you write when there is no tomorrow? Some inmates apologize. Some explain. Some justify. Some lash out at a world they believe abandoned them. And some leave behind words so ordinary they are devastating. Expressions of love, concern for family, small reminders about bills or belongings, as if they were leaving on a trip instead of facing death. Guards collect these letters carefully. They do not read them. They do not comment. But many carry the weight of those envelopes long after the execution is over. Because death row doesn't end at the chamber. It follows you home. As the evening deepens, the condemned man is moved. Not far, just a few cells away, but the shift is symbolic. This is the holding cell, closer to the chamber. Brighter lights. Fewer distractions. No shouting neighbors on either side. The isolation is intentional. It forces reflection. Time stretches painfully here. Minutes crawl. Seconds drag. Every sound becomes amplified. The hum of fluorescent lights, the scrape of boots on concrete, the distant murmur of voices beyond locked doors. The man listens to his own breathing, counting each inhale, wondering how many are left. Outside the prison, witnesses are gathering. Journalists, lawyers, victims' family members, state officials. All of them will sit behind glass, watching. Some want closure. Some want justice. Some simply want to see it done. Inside San Quentin, no one uses those words. Here, it's just called procedure. The execution chamber is prepared hours in advance. Equipment is checked and rechecked. Straps are laid out carefully, as if neatness might somehow soften what is about to happen. Medical personnel arrive, faces unreadable, trained to perform a task that sits uncomfortably between healing and killing. The gurney waits. Cold. Still. Unused. When the time finally comes, the walk begins. 2 guards take positions at either side of the inmate. Their grips are firm but not rough. There is no struggle. There almost never is. The man's legs feel distant, like they belong to someone else. Each step echoes down the corridor, loud and hollow. The walls seem to close in as he passes, absorbing the moment, storing it away like all the others before. Some inmates speak during the walk. Others remain silent. Some look around, trying to memorize details, cracks in the wall, faded paint, a flickering light, as if carrying pieces of the prison with them might make the end less final. When the chamber door opens, the smell hits first. Clean. Sterile. Wrong. The inmate is guided inside and positioned on the gurney. Straps are fastened around ankles, legs, waist, chest, arms. Each buckle clicks into place with mechanical precision. There is no rush, but there is no hesitation either. Witnesses take their seats behind the glass. A microphone is positioned near the inmate's head. This is the moment for last words. Some men apologize to the victims' families. Some declare innocence to the very end. Some forgive the world. Some curse it. And some say nothing at all, staring at the ceiling, lips pressed together, refusing to give the room anything more. When the words stop, or never come, the process moves forward. An intravenous line is inserted. Sometimes it goes smoothly. Sometimes it doesn't. Veins collapse. Skin resists. Time stretches again, uncomfortable and exposed, as technicians work silently to establish access. The witnesses watch everything. The man feels the cold of the saline. He feels the straps tightening as his chest rises and falls. He feels fear, not always panic, but something deeper and quieter. A realization settling into bone and muscle. There will be no appeal tonight. There will be no interruption. Somewhere behind glass, a signal is given. The drugs begin to flow. At first, there is a sensation of heaviness. Limbs grow warm, then numb. Breathing slows. The ceiling blurs. Consciousness drifts like a tide pulling away from shore. Some men fight it instinctively, gasping as the body tries to stay alive. Others slip under quickly, eyes closing, features relaxing. Seconds pass. Then minutes. A doctor steps forward. Checks for signs of life. Once. Twice. Finally, the time of death is pronounced. And just like that, it's over. The witnesses file out in silence. Some cry. Some look relieved. Some look haunted. The guards unstrap the body with the same care they used to secure it. The gurney is cleaned. The chamber is reset. San Quentin exhales. But Death Row does not celebrate. There is no relief, no closure for the men still inside. Instead, a deeper quiet settles over the East Block. Inmates lie awake in their cells, staring into darkness, replaying every detail they imagine just happened. Because if it happened to him, it can happen to them. And as the prison lights dim and the bay outside reflects the moon, San Quentin returns to its endless waiting. One execution closer, hundreds of sentences still unresolved, and a silence that feels heavier than any sound. After an execution, San Quentin does not return to normal. It pretends to. The schedules resume. Counts are taken. Trays slide through food slots. Guards walk the tiers with the same measured pace they always have. On the surface, nothing has changed. But beneath that routine, something has shifted. Something intangible but unmistakable. Death Row feels thinner now. One cell is empty. The mattress is gone. The personal items have been boxed and removed. Letters left behind are processed and sent to their final destinations. The concrete floor is scrubbed, the bars wiped down, as if cleanliness might erase the fact that a man once lay awake there, counting nights he would never see end. The silence around that cell is louder than any shouting ever was. Inmates notice immediately. They always do. They know which cell belonged to which man, how long he'd been there, what crime he was convicted of, whether he talked about his case with hope or resignation. Some had shouted conversations with him for years. Some had argued law with him across the tier. Some had never spoken a word to him at all, but still, they feel the absence. Because on death row, survival creates strange bonds. There is an unspoken ritual that follows an execution. Men speak more softly. Jokes disappear for a while. Arguments quiet down. Even those who claim they are unaffected lie awake longer at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to their own breathing, imagining footsteps stopping outside their door. A few men break down. They bang on their bars. They scream into the darkness, rage spilling out in raw, uncontrolled bursts. Guards intervene quickly, moving them to observation cells, watching closely for signs of self-harm. Because after an execution, the risk spikes. Hope collapses faster. Fear becomes contagious. Others withdraw completely. They stop responding to shouted greetings. They refuse recreation. They turn their faces to the wall and remain there for days, sometimes weeks. Psychologists note the symptoms: depression, dissociation, emotional numbing. But labels don't help much in a place where the cause is impossible to remove. You are surrounded by death. And you might be next. San Quentin's death row is unique not just because of its size, but because of its visibility. It exists in the shadow of one of the most progressive, wealthy regions in the world. Tourists snap photos of the bay just beyond its walls. Families picnic within sight of the prison's towers. Life goes on, bright and loud, only a short distance away. That contrast cuts deep. Inmates talk about it constantly. The sound of boats on the water, the distant laughter carried on the wind, the smell of salt and freedom drifting in through cracks in ancient stone. They are so close to the outside world they can almost touch it, yet more isolated than they've ever been. Some men say that's the cruelest part. Not the sentence, not the waiting, but the reminder of everything they will never have again. Years pass on death row like this. Executions become rarer. Legal battles stall. Governors declare moratoriums. The chamber sits unused, gathering dust, its equipment covered and silent. On paper, death sentences remain in place, but in practice, time becomes the real punishment. A man sentenced to die in his 20s may now be an old man, body failing, eyesight fading, joints stiff from decades in a concrete box. His execution date may never come. Or it may arrive suddenly, resurrected by a court decision, a political shift, a change in policy. That uncertainty is its own form of torture. Some inmates begin to wonder if the state has found a worse way to kill them, by letting them live, endlessly, in limbo. There are men on San Quentin's death row who have spent more time awaiting execution than many prisoners serve for life sentences. They have watched the world transform through news clippings and television screens. They've learned about the internet, smartphones, social media, things they will never touch. They've watched loved ones age and die from behind bars, attending funerals only in their imagination. And still, every morning, they wake up alive. For some, that is a gift. For others, it is a curse. Guards age alongside the inmates. New officers arrive, young and nervous, learning quickly that death row is not like other assignments. Veterans teach them the rules that aren't written down. Don't make promises, don't argue cases, don't ask about guilt, don't show fear. Most importantly, don't forget that these men are human, even when the job requires you to treat them like they're already dead. Some guards fail at that balance. Some become cold, mechanical, distant. Others carry the weight home with them, haunted by faces they can't forget, by last words they never wanted to hear. Turnover is high. Burnout is constant. San Quentin takes pieces from everyone. Inside the cells, men continue to wait. Some cases finally reach their end, not with execution, but with commutation. Sentences reduced. Death row entered one man at a time. When that happens, the reaction is complicated. Relief for the man leaving. Bitterness for those left behind. A reminder that survival here is uneven, unpredictable, and often arbitrary. There are men who were closer to death than anyone else, dates set, chambers prepared, who now live out life sentences instead. And there are men who believed they were safe, whose cases seemed stalled forever, who suddenly find themselves back in the crosshairs. Death row teaches one brutal lesson above all others. Nothing is permanent. Not hope. Not despair. Not even the sentence of death. As night falls again over San Quentin, the bay reflects city lights like scattered stars. Inside the East Block, men lie awake on thin mattresses, staring at ceilings that have witnessed generations of fear. Some pray. Some plan. Some surrender to exhaustion. And all of them listen. 4 footsteps. 4 keys. For the sound that means tomorrow will be different. Because on San Quentin's death row, the story never truly ends. It only pauses, waiting for the next name. Time does something cruel on San Quentin's death row. It stretches days until they feel endless, then steals years without warning. Men mark time in strange ways: scratches on paper, notes in legal folders, birthdays remembered and then quietly forgotten. Seasons change outside the walls, but inside the East Block, everything feels locked in a permanent grey twilight. New inmates arrive occasionally, escorted down the tier with eyes wide, absorbing the reality they once only imagined. Veterans of death row watch them carefully. They can tell within days who will adapt and who will unravel. Some newcomers shout their innocence loudly, pacing their cells like caged animals. Others go silent immediately, sitting on their bunks for hours, staring at nothing. The first weeks are the hardest. That's when the sentence finally sinks in. That's when men realize this isn't county jail, or a temporary stop, or a place you pass through. This is where the state sends people to wait for death, whether that death comes by execution or by the slow erosion of the self. Older inmates sometimes offer advice. Not kindness exactly, more like survival instructions. Don't count days. Don't trust rumors. Don't believe anyone who tells you they know what's coming next. Most important of all, don't let yourself imagine the chamber too clearly. Because once that image takes root, it never leaves. Some men cope by creating routines so rigid they resemble rituals. Wake up at the same time. Exercise in the narrow space between the bunk and the bars. Read for exactly 3 hours. Write letters until lights out. Order gives shape to chaos. Structure keeps the mind from wandering where it shouldn't. Others turn inward. They replay their crimes, their trials, their lives before prison. They wonder who they might have been if one moment had gone differently. If one decision had been delayed. If one person had stepped in. That line of thinking is dangerous. It opens doors that can't be closed again. There are men on death row who no longer remember what freedom feels like. Not truly. They remember ideas, cars, streets, restaurants, sunlight, but the physical sensation has faded. The body adapts to confinement in unsettling ways. Space feels threatening. Silence feels unnatural. Choice feels overwhelming. A few inmates who have been removed from death row after decades struggle more than anyone expected. Life sentences offer survival, but not necessarily peace. Some men say death row changed them so completely that living afterward feels like being a ghost in a world that moved on without them. San Quentin doesn't prepare anyone for that. It was never meant to. Every so often, the outside world remembers death row exists. A news story breaks. A court ruling hits headlines. Debates flare up about justice, punishment, morality. People argue passionately, confidently, from far away. Inside the East Block, those arguments sound distant and hollow. Because here, death isn't theoretical. It has a smell, a sound, a procedure, and the men living with it don't have the luxury of abstraction. There are inmates who say they deserve their sentence. They speak plainly, without drama. They acknowledge the harm they caused. Some believe execution would bring closure, not just for victims' families, but for themselves. Others cling fiercely to claims of innocence, filing appeal after appeal, refusing to let the system have the final word. San Quentin treats them the same. Guilt does not change the size of the cell. Innocence does not unlock the door. Late at night, conversations drift through the tiers. They're quieter now, more reflective. Men talk about dreams they've had, strange ones, vivid ones, where they walk freely or stand in familiar places that no longer exist. Some dream of the chamber. Some dream of nothing at all. A few speak about death itself, not as an enemy, but as an inevitability. They wonder what it feels like at the very end. Whether there's fear, or calm, or simply darkness. Whether the body knows before the mind does. whether regret has weight. Guards hear fragments of these conversations as they make their rounds. They never interrupt. Some pretend not to hear at all. But those words follow them, echoing later in quiet kitchens and dark bedrooms, long after the shift ends. San Quentin has a way of crossing boundaries. It doesn't stay behind the walls. Years continue to pass. Executions remain paused. Lawsuits pile up. The death penalty in California becomes something almost symbolic, present, powerful, but rarely enforced. And yet, the sentence remains active. The chamber remains ready. The files remain open. Death row continues to exist in a state of suspended animation, a punishment without resolution. For the men inside, this limbo becomes life. They age into it. They adapt. They survive in ways that would have once seemed impossible. But survival does not mean safety, because all it takes is one decision, one court ruling, one signature, one shift in political will. And suddenly, the waiting ends. As another night settles over San Quentin, fog rolls in from the bay, swallowing the lights along the shoreline. Inside the East Block, shadows stretch across concrete floors. The prison hums softly, endlessly, like a machine that never sleeps. Men close their eyes, unsure if tomorrow will be the same as today, or something far worse. Because on San Quentin's death row, the future is never promised. It's only postponed. And somewhere, behind locked doors and layers of security, the chamber waits. Patient, silent, unforgiving. There is a moment on San Quentin's death row that few people ever talk about. It happens long before an execution date is set. Long before paperwork moves or chambers are prepared. It happens quietly, inside the mind of the inmate, usually late at night, when exhaustion strips away denial. It is the moment a man realizes he might never leave this place. Not in a body bag. Not in shackles. But not alive, either. Just never leave. For some, that realization is more frightening than death itself, because death has an ending. This does not. Men begin to understand that death row is not only a sentence, it is a condition. A psychological landscape where time loses meaning and the future collapses into a single question that never gets answered. Will it happen? Or won't it? That question becomes everything. Inmates learn to read the smallest signals from the outside world. A new governor sworn in. A Supreme Court ruling hinted at in the news. A lawsuit gaining traction. These events ripple through the tears like distant thunder. Hope surges. Then stalls. Then fades again. The emotional whiplash is relentless. Some men stop following the news entirely. They say it's easier not to know. Easier to exist day by day, meal by meal, count by count. Others obsess over every headline, every legal update, every rumor whispered by a guard or lawyer. They believe vigilance might save them. Sometimes it does. Often, it doesn't. San Quentin has housed men who were scheduled to die multiple times. Execution date set, stays granted at the last minute, chambers prepared and then abandoned. Each time, the psychological toll deepens. Relief turns to anger. Gratitude turns to bitterness. Surviving once doesn't make the next time easier. It makes it worse. Because now you know exactly how close you came. There are inmates who say the closest they ever came to losing their sanity was not when an execution date was set, but when it was taken away. When the build-up, the terror, the final preparations were suddenly reversed, leaving them suspended between life and death once more. The body doesn't know how to process that. The mind doesn't either. Guards notice the change immediately. Men who once talked constantly grow quiet. Men who once laughed become rigid, hyper-aware. Sleep disorders worsen. Nightmares intensify. Some men begin to talk to themselves, not loudly, not obviously, just enough to feel less alone. Mental health staff do what they can, but there are limits to treatment in a place built to destroy hope. You cannot counsel away the fact that a man is legally sentenced to die. You cannot medicate uncertainty. You cannot therapize a chamber that exists down the hall. San Quentin's death row teaches endurance, not healing. And endurance has a cost. There are inmates who begin to prepare for death even without a date. They give away personal items. They stop ordering commissary. They detach from relationships on the outside, believing it's kinder to fade away slowly than to be torn away suddenly. Families feel it too. Letters change in tone. Phone calls grow shorter. Some relatives stop calling altogether. unable to bear the emotional strain of a relationship that exists in constant limbo. Others cling fiercely, refusing to let the prison erase their loved one completely. Every goodbye feels premature. Every conversation feels like it might be the last. San Quentin sits there, unmoved, watching it all unfold. The prison has outlived wars, presidents, social movements, and legal revolutions. It has adapted just enough to survive, but never enough to soften. Its stones have absorbed generations of fear, and its corridors echo with stories that will never be fully told. Even staff members feel it. Veteran guards speak of a moment, often years into the job, when they realize they've stopped reacting emotionally to death row. Executions no longer shock them. Sentences no longer provoke reflection. Everything becomes procedural. That realization scares them more than the job ever did, because it means the prison is winning. And yet, despite everything, life persists. Men still wake up. Men still breathe. Men still hope, quietly, cautiously, against their better judgment. They find meaning in small things. A letter that arrives unexpectedly. A legal motion that isn't denied outright. A sunrise glimpse through bars, painting the bay in colors that seem almost cruel in their beauty. Those moments don't erase the sentence, but they keep the soul from disappearing entirely. San Quentin's death row is not a single story. It is hundreds of overlapping lives, frozen at different moments of despair and resilience. It is a place where the worst thing imaginable is always possible, but never guaranteed. And that uncertainty is the point. As another night settles in, the prison lights hum to life once more. Guards walk their routes. Keys jingle. Radios murmur softly. Inside their cells, men stare into darkness, each alone with thoughts no one else can fully understand. Some will die here. Some will leave. Some will wait forever. But all of them live under the same shadow. A shadow cast by a chamber that may never be used again, or may be used tomorrow. Because on San Quentin's death row, death is not an event. It is a presence. Always watching. Always waiting. As the years grind on, something strange happens on San Quentin's death row. Fear, once sharp and overwhelming, begins to dull, not because it disappears, but because living with it every day reshapes it into something heavier, quieter, and far more dangerous. It settles into the bones. It becomes routine. And when fear becomes routine, it changes the way a man understands himself. Some inmates stop thinking of themselves as alive. They speak about their bodies as temporary containers, about their names as things that no longer belong to them. They talk about their pasts in the third person, as if the man who committed the crime, or was accused of committing it, was someone else entirely. A stranger who made choices they are now condemned to pay for. This psychological distance is a survival mechanism. If you stay fully present in a place like this, it breaks you. San Quentin has seen men slowly erase themselves without ever touching a razor or refusing a meal. They withdraw piece by piece, first from conversations, then from hobbies, then from emotion itself. Eventually, they exist only to comply. Stand for count. Sit for meals. Sleep when the lights go out. They are alive. But barely. Others go the opposite direction. They become hyper-aware, almost spiritually alert. They read philosophy, theology, psychology. They debate morality across the tiers late into the night. They ask questions most people avoid their entire lives. What makes a life worth living, whether redemption has limits, whether suffering can ever balance harm? There are no clear answers here. Only opinions shaped by concrete walls and locked doors. Occasionally, death row is shaken by news that feels almost unreal. A conviction overturned. New DNA evidence discovered. A witness recants. A man who once waited for execution is suddenly told he will leave death row, not for the chamber, but for another prison, another chance at life. The reactions are complicated. Celebration echoes down the tier, followed quickly by silence. Joy is dangerous here. It reminds everyone else of what they don't have. Some men congratulate the one who's leaving. Others turn away, unable to watch hope materialize for someone else. And when that man is gone, when his cell sits empty, not because he died but because he survived, the absence feels different. Lighter, but also sharper, because it proves the system can be wrong. And that knowledge is both comforting and terrifying. San Quentin doesn't acknowledge these moments publicly. Transfers happen quietly. Paperwork moves efficiently. The machine continues forward, unchanged. The prison does not apologize. It does not explain. It simply adjusts. Outside, the debate over capital punishment continues to evolve. Protests flare up. Courtrooms fill with arguments about constitutionality, morality, deterrence. Politicians speak in careful language. Laws shift, stall, reverse. Inside death row, those debates feel distant. Because regardless of public opinion, the sentence remains printed in black ink inside thick files: death. The men living under that sentence understand something few others do: that the cruelty of death row is not only in the act of execution, but in the endless anticipation of it. In the way life is reduced to waiting for a decision made by strangers in rooms you will never enter. One afternoon blends into the next. Another year passes almost unnoticed. Some inmates mark anniversaries: the day they arrived, the day they were sentenced, the day an appeal was denied. Others refuse to acknowledge time at all, believing that counting only deepens the wound. Guards keep working. Shifts rotate. Faces change. But the prison remains. San Quentin has seen hanging, gas, lethal injection. It has watched methods change while the core purpose stayed the same. Even now, with executions paused, the structure remains ready. Protocols are still written. Training still exists. The option of death is never removed, only delayed. Late one night, as fog presses thick against the walls, a guard pauses outside a cell longer than usual. Inside, an inmate sits upright on his bunk, alert, listening. For a brief moment, the entire world seems to hold its breath. Then the guard moves on. Nothing happens. Relief floods the cell, followed almost immediately by exhaustion. This cycle repeats endlessly. False alarms that leave scars. Moments that remind men how fragile their psychological balance truly is. Because every sound could mean everything. As dawn approaches, the prison takes on a strange stillness. The bay lightens. The fog thins. Birds cry somewhere beyond the walls. Life, absurdly, continues. Inside death row, men wake again. Some will fight. Some will endure. Some will fade. And some will still believe, quietly, stubbornly, that their story has not reached its end. San Quentin offers no answers. It never has. It stands where it always has, watching generations pass through its shadow, collecting stories it will never tell and lives it will never return. And as long as death row exists, so will the question that haunts every man inside its walls. Not if death will come, but when, or whether the waiting itself will be the punishment that finally destroys them. As the years blur together, San Quentin remains exactly where it has always been, anchored to the edge of the bay, unmoving, unyielding, watching the world change without ever changing itself. For the men on death row, the final realization arrives quietly. Not as panic, not as anger, but as understanding. They come to see that this place was never built to deliver justice alone. It was built to suspend life in a permanent state of unresolved ending. A place where punishment is not just death, but the constant awareness of it. A place where the future is reduced to a question no one will answer. Some inmates stop asking altogether. They wake up. They eat. They sleep. Days pass, then years. Faces age in reflected steel. Hands grow slower. Voices soften. The sentence remains unchanged, but the men beneath it slowly transform into something else, survivors of a system designed to erase them. There are men who will die of illness here. Men who will die of age. Men who will be executed if the state decides to resume what it once did without hesitation. And there are men who will leave. Not because the prison forgives them. Not because the system admits fault. But because time, politics, and uncertainty intersect in ways no one can predict. San Quentin offers no guarantees. It never has. When execution stopped, some believed death row had lost its purpose. But inside these walls, the truth is painfully clear. A paused execution is not the same as a lifted sentence. The chamber still exists. The protocols still stand. The threat remains, silent but intact. And that silence is heavy. At night, when the East Block settles into stillness, there is a moment when even the guards slow their steps. Radios quiet. Keys stop jingling. The prison seems to listen to itself, as if aware of everything it has held within its walls. Men lie on their bunks, staring into darkness, breathing steadily, counting nothing at all. They no longer imagine the chamber in detail. They no longer picture the walk. Those images have worn thin from repetition. What remains is simpler. This might be the rest of my life. And that thought carries a weight no execution ever could. Outside, the bay continues to shimmer under moonlight. Cars pass on distant roads. Homes glow warm with life and conversation. The world does not stop for San Quentin. It never has. But within the prison, time feels suspended, caught between what has already happened and what might still come. San Quentin has executed men. It has spared men. It has broken men. And it has watched men endure things most will never understand. Its walls stand as witnesses, absorbing fear, hope, regret, and resilience in equal measure. And long after the debates fade, after the headlines disappear, after policies change and change again, one truth remains. Death Row does not need an execution to fulfill its purpose. It only needs time. Time to wait. Time to wear. Time to make uncertainty the sentence. Because the most terrifying thing about San Quentin's death row is not the chamber at the end of the hall. It's the fact that for hundreds of men, the end may never come at all. And as the final lights dim inside the East Block, as the last count is taken and the prison exhales into another uneasy night, the question lingers, unanswered, unresolved, and heavy in the air. Who is justice for? The living? The dead? Or the ones left behind to wait in silence? San Quentin does not respond. It never has. It simply stands there, grey, ancient, and patient, watching the bay, holding its secrets, and waiting for the next name that may never be called. And in that waiting, the true sentence is carried out. Every single day. San Quentin Death Row isn't just a prison. It's a waiting room for the inevitable, where time becomes the sentence, and silence speaks louder than any cell door. What would you do if every day felt like your last? Comment your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more dark, real-life stories from behind the walls.